Welcome in to another episode of the My Two Bits Gators Football Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Ben, joined as always by your other host, Mr. Randy. Randy, how we feeling? Kind of a close win. Not really, but closer than it should have been in basketball tonight. Are we doing okay? Did you survive? How you feeling?
I survived, my man. Good evening to you. Yeah, it's one of those things where the weather's warming up, right? We're thawing out. Gator basketball should be warming up. At times they're warm, at times they get really hot, and other times they cool off again, right? Some inconsistencies. But it's all good. A win's a win. Will not complain too much. But outside of that, happy to get into this pod with you, my man. Hope you are doing well and everything in your neck of the woods.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Doing okay, staying busy for sure, but that's everybody right now. So with that, we will get into tonight. We are going to give you a quick little basketball update to start this thing. But in general, this pod is going to be about the impact of coaching. We can talk about that for basketball too, but we won't. On the in the current college football landscape. So impact of coaching in the current college football landscape. So we'll start things off as always. I'll give you our intro, our mission, our accuracy disclaimer, our vision, and then our agenda for this pod. So our mission, of course, to provide factual analysis of all things Florida Gator football. Our accuracy disclaimer is that our information will be accurate to the best of our possible ability. We will cite our sources whenever we use them, and all statistical data comes from either ESPN or stats.ncaa.org, and recruiting data comes from on3.com. Our vision, of course, is to have unfiltered conversation around the product on the field, as well as recruiting and overall coaching decisions. Our analysis will be based on review of film, and while we will express opinion, that opinion should always be based in some form of fact. We will also evaluate strategy and tactics and discuss our observation of player personnel decision, as well as on-the-field execution. All right. So, agenda for this evening. As I mentioned, quick basketball update here to start. Trying to do that a little more frequently now that we're getting closer to March. And the
Yeah.
team is, of course, doing well again. Feel it's appropriate. Then we're going to get into the breakdown here. Three quick dots in terms of the agenda here: talent, composite versus results. So we'll explain that further, but that's the first thing we're going to look at here is how the talent composite versus the results that we're seeing has shifted just here recently. And then talk about that in relation to NIL and the transfer portal and what impact that has had and how it's played a role, obviously, and then talk about the coaching impact alongside that. So that's the full agenda. That's all we've got in terms of dot points, but we do, I think, have some very interesting stuff that we want to get into. So first and foremost, let's do a real quick basketball update. Talk me through your thoughts on, I guess, South Carolina and the recent games since we last discussed the team in our previous pod. What do you got for me?
Yeah, here's the thing, right? It's hard to beat up a win. And we know that the way the season started was not ideal. We had a lot of close games. We know that there was a shift in the team, obviously, when looking at the backcourt and looking at everything else that happened, what we lost, the production. And so after we demolish a few teams, right? We demolished A&M, it seemed like. We took sole possession of the SEC lead, so that was great. Ever since then, again, we had some great wins at Georgia, great win, Kentucky, right? Again, a great win tonight. But it just seems like we've got these lingering things. I remember watching the Kentucky game over the weekend and thinking, man, there so many different opportunities we had to put the game away, put it away early, especially in that first half, and another burst there in the second half. Because it seems like we can be up, it's neck and neck. We go up by 10. Okay, they cut it back down to 6. Next thing you know, we're up by 14 to 16. We're feeling good. We let our foot off the gas. And next thing you know, the lead's only 6 or 4 or even closer than that. So the inconsistencies there. What's odd is we're not shooting the three ball well this season. But however, if you look at the past 3 games, tonight included, 26% tonight, 38% Kentucky, 35% Georgia. So the 38 and 35 above our season average of what, 28 and change, 29. But again, tonight fell right back into that slum of that 3-point shooting. So that combined with points in the paint combines with the turnover margin, which is not as ideal as we would like. Again, we're not trying to beat up a win, but it's these different things that we really need to tighten the screws down on come 3 more weeks. And when that run starts, when the tournament happens, the SEC tournament and March Madness. So definitely some I guess, as you would say, be a chink or two in the armor, things that we
Yep.
need to work out. So again, happy with the win, happy to see the momentum that they've built, but at the same time, we know that we could be that much better. So that's where I'm at.
Yep, for sure. And I think you flip-flopped those percentages. It was 38 against Georgia, 35 against Kentucky. I think you said it the other way. I
I
think.
think I did. I think I
But
did.
that's
Thank
cool.
you.
So again, just in the interest of accuracy, we try to get it right. So, but overall, I think, yeah, I would agree with everything you just said there, right? It definitely feels like they were playing better up to Texas A&M, and since A&M, it does feel like there's been a few things that just haven't been quite as good. Um, Defensively, I'd say we're still just as good. The defense has been there pretty consistently. Just a few things offensively that were clicking better up until and through that game. And actually I think we shot the three better against them too. I didn't look at the percentage on that one, but I think we shot the three a little better against them as well. Don't know the percentage on that, but ultimately, again, I think it's good to see them win differently, as I think you kind of mentioned or alluded to.
Yeah.
It's good to see them find different ways to win. That's important. You have to do that in March. You can't just employ the same philosophy in every game and expect to win, right? It doesn't work. You will get beat if you do that, for sure. So it's good to find them find ways to win ugly. I mean, Kentucky was a little ugly, and we found a way to win against a good team. I mean, they're playing much better. They're a good team. They're a tournament team for sure. Um, and we found a way to win that game, which was important. Now, do we do it again at Rupp? That's important too. That'll be interesting. That's a test I want to see. And then obviously we have
Yeah.
Arkansas as well to close out here. So those two games I think will be good measuring sticks. And then obviously how do we do in the SEC tournament itself? That'll be important to see as well. Especially assuming we maintain the overall number one seed, which we should, because there's really only one game, possibly two on the schedule we could lose and currently have a, 2-game lead. So it should be that we maintain that. Hopefully we win all of those and go from there. But I think overall, again, like you pretty much nailed it. I won't belabor the point, but definitely just some things here that are a little bit like, liked how we were doing there for that 3-4 game stretch a lot, and then we're kind of pulling back here. Now, is that just because the games aren't as big or as important? I
Yeah.
mean, Kentucky was, but aside from that, like, is that all that's causing it? Maybe. We'll see, right? So stay tuned. We'll see what happens. Good to
Yeah.
see a little bit better 3-point until tonight, but can we keep that going with this being the exception as instead of those being the exceptions, right? Or can we find a way to get back into the paint like we did against Bama and really dominate in there significantly? Again, it's not going to be 72 points, but can we get 50 plus in the paint if we're not shooting the three well, right? Because I think it needs to be one or the other. Tonight was neither. Tonight was not great, but you're 2.5 days removed from Kentucky.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it. You can get a little bit of a pass on that, a little bit.
Yeah.
So, all right, moving along. Let's get into this discussion about coaching. I'm sure Todd's coaching will be interesting after this game because I'm sure he's not happy with that performance and he will let the team know it. So, but let's talk about coaching in college football, particularly pre and post NIL, if you will, or before and after, really, I guess, because it's not over, obviously. Before and since, maybe. So get us started here. Take us
Yeah.
back here, and let's look at some history as it relates to talent composite and the results of the seasons dating back a few years. Get us started.
Absolutely. So what we're doing here is looking back from the 2016 season through the 2023 season, at all the national championships, all the games, the winners and losers of that. And more specifically, the reason why we're looking at 2016 through 2023, we want to have a good sample size. But the other thing is the reason why we cut it short, I think, is a good refresher. NIL, right? NIL and its effectiveness. So NIL was in play in June of 2021. Okay. And so when you look at that, yeah, it was approved in 21, but it really didn't take effect until 22, and then greater effect really in full force for 23. So that's the reason why we did that. The other thing is when you look at the transfer portal, I don't think people realize this. It launched in October of 2018, even longer than NIL. So you've got the transfer portal when it initially launched, players did not need permissions from the schools. And then in June of 21, kind of to mimic, to kind of coincide with NIL, now you can transfer once without sitting out a year. And then in 24, it morphed again into allowing student athletes to transfer multiple times,
Yep.
maintain eligibility. And then, of course, recently we just had the change with the 15-day transfer window and the coaching change and all that jazz, right? So that's why we're looking at 2016 through 2023. If we look at that subset of years, okay, winners and losers were inside the top 10 in total talent composite rankings, with the lone exception of Clemson in 2016. They were ranked 13th overall in talent composite. Outside of that, if you look at the next years after that, Clemson and Alabama, 9-1, Alabama and UGA, number 1 and number 4, respectively. Clemson and Alabama in 2019, number 6 and number 2, respectively. The list goes on and on. So very, very interesting to see. And then in 2023, you had TCU against Georgia, which we all know how that game was going to end. And TCU was outside of the top 10, right? Ranked number 32 overall in transfer in the composite. So very interesting there as far as the winners and losers, not just making to throughout the season with their overall talent composite, but the outcome of that game.
Yep, absolutely. And by the way, these talent composite ratings are the 247 talent composite ratings. They're the only rankings institution that does a full team talent composite. So that is what we're using here. So even though we usually get our recruiting data from On3, for this, we had to use 247 because they're just the only ones that do this full team composite. And just a brief summary of what it is, we've talked about it before, but it's basically just the full team breakdown of all players that are on the active roster, right? Doesn't count practice squad guys, or walk-on guys if you're talking college football. NFL's practice squad, but ultimately it's your full team active scholarship players, right? And what their rating is. So in fairness, it's not always the best assessment, because you can have like freshmen that aren't really playing that hit this rating, and if they're 5-star, then you get a better rating. So it's not always truly indicative of what's actually on the field, but it does give you a pretty good analysis of like the breakdown of this, right? So again, to the point here, with the lone exception of, well, TCU, as you mentioned, but let's be honest, TCU was they didn't exactly belong in that game.
Not at all.
Most lopsided in history in a national championship game. But outside of them, the only one outside the top 10 to even make that game was Clemson at 13th, right? So still right there. Right, still right there. And of course, when they were 13th, they lost. Right, now they did win it, as I'll get to here in a moment, when they were 6th. And they're the only one to ever win it outside the top 5 in those years, which is another interesting point. So if we look at just the winners of the game, the only time, actually, again, the only time outside the top 5, and still then it was 6th, was Clemson in 2017. I'm sorry. No, outside the top 6 was Clemson 2017 was ranked 9th, excuse me. 9th. They also won it when they were 6th. So pardon me on that. I've mixed up my numbers there. So again, they won it in 6th, I believe in 2019, or no, I think 2019. 19. Yeah, yep. And then they also won it in 2017 at 9th. So Clemson definitely did a good job of overperforming their ranking by being able to win outside the top 5, because they were the only one to ever do it in this stretch of years. We weren't able to go back further than the 2015 rosters, so the 2016 title game and further thus the years. But still, again, as you mentioned, good sample size there, good stuff to look at here. And again, you looked at what teams got in. Right, always within that top 10 on the talent composite, with very limited exception being only one, and always within the top 6 as a winner, with again only one exception being 9th. So very interesting, right? What does it tell us? What it tells us is that you needed, in the pre-NIL era of impact, to have a very talented roster to not only make the game, but certainly to win the game. Right? It was just a prerequisite. And we've known this. This is not new news. If you've followed college football for any amount of time, this was a known commodity. You had to have a super talented roster. It's why we focus on recruiting so much. Why we always talk about having a top tier class, right? All of these things. It matters. You have to have it to really perform at the highest level. Or do you? Break down what's been going on the last couple of years.
See, and that's where we transfer now, right?
Yeah.
Literally and figuratively. But when you look at what happened in the 2024 game, Washington versus Michigan, you had the 26 overall talent composite versus the number 14 overall talent composite, both outside the top 10.
Yep.
Obviously, Washington was what it was. Yeah, give you a honorable mention on that one. Kind of like TCU versus Georgia the year before.
Well,
In
not quite that bad, but yeah.
No, not that quite that bad, but at the end of the day, you just knew what the outcome was going to be, especially after the first quarter. In
Well,
2025.
there could be some other reasons there, but we will leave the Jim Harbaugh Michigan scandal out of this. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jim Harbaugh and scandal, are those synonymous? Are they really? Um, no, no sign stealing whatsoever. In 2025, of course, you had Ohio State versus Notre Dame, a 3 versus a number 9 in overall talent composite. So there you go, top 10,
Return to
fine, but
form. Yep,
return
return
to
to
form.
form for sure.
But this past year, folks, Miami, number 15 versus Indiana, Hoosierville,
Hold on to
a
your hat if you don't
basketball
know. If you don't
school.
know.
Yeah, a basketball school. Bobby Knight throwing chairs. Calbert Cheney. I don't know what else to say. A 72 overall talent composite. In other
It's just
words,
wild.
not having any business sniffing the CFP, and they're your national champions. So,
Yep.
starting in 2024, we've now seen twice in the past 3 years both teams outside the top 10 in the title game, and Indiana being the absolute massive elephant in the room outlier, not only making it, but winning it all and putting the SIG on top. Unbelievable with an overall talent composite of 72. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild. So what are we saying? Now, any team that, is in the top 100 is, guaranteed to get a shot? No, we're
No.
definitely not saying that. We're definitely not saying that. This is an absolute outlier. This is way, way far away from the mean here, right? In terms of deviation. This is not something you would expect to see. Sig is clearly a monster, as we addressed when we were talking about coaching candidates last year. He definitely knows what he's doing, and has made a lot out of a little. Clearly, this is not something you would expect to see happen frequently or again. 72nd, but as you pointed out, we have seen now multiple teams in the teens and the 20s make this game in the past couple of years, even counting TCU getting in there at 32, right? Which again, probably shouldn't have been there, but they made it, and that hadn't happened before. So you can't totally discredit, even if it was before NIL was really fully impacting, as you mentioned. Right. Technically did exist, but it's a little early to really have an impact. But to your point, the portal could have started to impact there and did, right? So that is a really good point that you brought up there, in terms of more portal availability, right? Less restrictions on that in terms of not having to sit out a year at that point was in play. You didn't have multiple transfers yet, but you didn't have to sit out in conference, which previously was a rule unless you were a grad transfer. So ultimately, there is some stuff that was starting to factor in a little bit, and some reasons why you could start to point to the talent gap being less significant. So what are we talking about here? Why is this a thing? So, okay, these rankings don't mean anything anymore? No. What it means is that you just don't have the same gap between these rankings that you did before. And that's where we're going to start talking about here in our next section. But before we get into that, I think the really kind of take home here is that you don't have to have, clearly there's data to back this up, at least for now. This could change. This may evolve back, right? Things can turn. We don't know what the future holds. But for the time being, at least in the current state in these last few years, you don't have to have. It's not saying it doesn't help you. We're not saying it's bad to have, right? Clearly, Ohio State and Notre Dame, 3 and 9, it can still help, but you don't have to have the most talented roster in the world if you can make up for that in some other ways, i.e., coaching.
No
And
chance.
that's the point that we're going to get to here in the long run. But before we get there, we want to talk about NIL and transfer portal. But any other thoughts do you have on just this results from these title games and the overall composite rating before we move on?
Yeah, I just think it's crucial to understand, and I know I said the point, but when you repeated it and you drove it home, this added another element to the equation because the transfer. I don't think most people know the transfer portal was around in 2018, but I think a lot of players regretted it. No, sorry, not regretted. They did not want to participate because who wants to sit out a year? Right. And so
Right.
once that change and eligibility change, and hey, you don't have to sit out, and hey, then it just opened up different floodgates. And then the coinciding it with NIL producing this other wave of now free agency, if you want to call it that, just
Yeah, that's what it is.
really leveled or is leveling or resetting or recalibrating the playing field, right? Literally and figuratively.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, a lot of changes here. So let's get into what that impact looks like a little more in detail in terms of not only talking about the results, but also just some of the differences in the teams. So obviously, when you have the impact of all schools being able to pay players, at least to some extent, right? Let's call a spade, right? Everybody can pay players now. Perhaps some could pay before, but
Ah,
now everybody can, right? What was the Ed Orgeron joke on the podcast he was on? Used to have to take money in the back door. Now we just take it in the front door, right? So
another great Coach O quote.
that was a classic one. Um, so number one, everybody can do this. And to your point, now talented players can transfer to another school that they can still get paid at, right? They're not getting paid clearly. And if they aren't getting playing time where they are, why not transfer to a place where they could, right? Just as a base level example. Now, obviously, there's other reasons they might transfer, a lot of other reasons, but ultimately, they might not necessarily have to go um, to as big a name school. They could go to potentially still a Power Four or even a high level group of five, right? There's plenty of NFL guys that didn't go to Power Four schools, plenty of them.
Hmm.
Actually, almost a surprising amount, to be honest with you, if you listen to where some of these guys went to school on a Sunday. But ultimately, the point that I'm trying to make is you can develop your talents in different places in different ways if you see the potential to do so. And if you're not getting field time at the school you're at now, again, you can still get paid and you can still go somewhere else and get on the field and get those reps and get that development and potentially make it to the league and build a career out of this if that's what you're looking to do. And you potentially have the talent to do so. The days of 5 stars being stacked up on your bench, Alabama, Georgia, right?
Yeah.
Clemson, even for a time there, they're gone. That is not happening anymore. Your roster is not going to be 3, 4, 5 deep at any position with 5 star. It's just not going to happen, period. I don't care who you are, how great a program you are, how great your legacy is. It's just not going to happen. Those kids are not going to sit 2, 3 years and wait and not play so that they can get in for 2 seasons before they go pro. They're just not going to do it. It's not going to happen. And I don't blame them, to be honest with you, in the current environment. I really don't. I wouldn't either if I were in their shoes. And not because of loyalty or anything else. If you're not playing, then what is it you're being loyal to? Right? I mean, really, if you're not getting out on the field and you're not getting the opportunity to get on film, I mean, we could have a discussion there, but that's not the point of this.
No.
The idea behind this is just to say that it's just not realistic and it's not going to happen. And to me, again, that makes sense. So that's the first point here. So let's look again. I'll swing this one back over to you. Let's go back to the talent composite and look at some of the gaps here that we see.
Yeah. So the other thing that I'd like to say to that end is look at the universal, the direct and indirect compensation for college athletes through NIL deals. And guess what? Collectives are still around, folks. Period.
Oh yeah.
Right? And the way that they've transformed college sports into semi-professionalized, professionalized, market-driven systems. And so at the end of the day, the NIL or NIL in general has turned into the ultimate recruiting tool. While talent still matters, right? The ability to fund NIL collectives has changed where that talent ends up. To B's point, they're not no longer sitting on the bench waiting for their turn because they were highly recruited and that's it, right? Programs with the highest NIL capacity now has the opportunity to lure or buy that elite talent away and plug and impact a system like a plug and play. And that's what we're seeing a lot more now of. Now, looking at the talent composite specifically, look at the gap between the top team and the 25th ranked team. The average difference in ranking for 2015 to 2017 was 291.67. Again, the talent gap in the talent composite ratings. However, looking at the same gap from 23 to 2025, that number, 291.67, reduced to an average of 243.5. Huge margin of talent gap change. And this helps to show the impact of what NIL and the transfer portal has done to narrow that margin.
Yep. So just for perspective, the top team is usually somewhere in either the high 900s or the low 1000s in terms of their overall point ranking. And you're talking about almost a 50-point change in that spread, in that average difference, right, between those two. And that's an average of the, just so you know, that's not the average totals. That's the average between, of the gap between 1 and 25. So we took 1 and 25 from 15, 16, and 17, subtracted the differences in those and averaged them, and did the same thing for 23 to 25. So that is just the difference between 1 and 25. That's not accounting for 24, 23, 22, 21, right? And how much closer those are getting to, right? So the talent is just bunching up way more than it did before, to the point that we were just talking about, right? Those 5 stars are not riding the bench at Bama and Georgia and Clemson or Michigan or Ohio State, right? Any of the top tier programs that are getting these guys out of high school consistently in the recruiting classes, Oregon, right? They're not staying there if they're not playing. And actually, interestingly, a development that we're starting to see is they're actually getting paid less coming out of high school than they are out of the portal. So the portal talent is actually now attracting even bigger NIL deals. See Miami at quarterback if you have any questions about what those deals are worth. So, you know, those are actually where the biggest money deals are coming from now, is actually with these guys that are transferring instead of high school recruits, right? The days of the 13.6 million Jada Rashada deals are dead.
Oh boy. Oh,
I don't even want to say it. I shouldn't have even said it. But yeah, those days are gone. You're not going to see anything like that even be hinted at, whether it was real or not. That's over. Sorry, I shouldn't have done it, but I couldn't help myself. So long story short, the point here is, again, that gap between 1 and 25. I'm sure we would have found something similar if we looked at 1 and 50, quite frankly. I don't know if it would have been as extreme as this, but you're talking about like a 5% difference from just, you know, 15 to 17 versus 23 to 25. That's not even 10 years. I mean, from the first to the last year it is, but for the overall span of what we're talking about, there's not that much time in between there, right? So it's pretty significant. It's pretty amazing, quite frankly, when we look at this and see the difference between these two. So to that point, if your talent gap gets more narrow, what has to change for you to get better? Coaching. So walk us through a little on what we found here with coaching and what we were talking about, if you would, please, sir.
So we're going to reference, of course, the SIG. So there's been a big difference there. But success rate has always been a stat that's coincided with a team's ability to prevail at the end of the season. All the national title winners since 2016 have ranked in the top 3 in success rate overall, combined for offense and defense, as per fourthandshort.com. As we know, especially when it comes to the SIG, the impact that coaching has had, and hence why, especially over the past few seasons, we have seen a tremendous shakeup or a tremendous coaching carousel occur in college football because every school or the schools that need it are looking for that magic coach, that magic potion with the magic formula, with the magic words, with the magic budget to attract the talent that they need to be on top of the college football landscape. So definitely a driving force for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the telling thing there being, obviously success rate. And for the record, success rate is not the only thing, obviously, but it
No,
is a good thing to look at here. And it's certainly not the only thing we would use to evaluate or look at. And for those that aren't familiar with this stat, basically it just measures like how well do you do all the things that kind of factor into a football game. I won't go into all the specifics, but how do you do when you're supposed to do uh, you know, the run the typical play on first down, second down, third down. How do you do when you're passing the ball? How do you do when you're running the ball? How do you do it
yeah,
big plays? How do you do it stopping all that coinciding stuff on defense? And then how do you do on special teams? And they roll that all together. And just how effective are you, basically, thus success rate. And they roll all those metrics up together, and whoever ranks out right for that overall is where they kind of compile and look at that stuff. Now, different sites have different measures of this. Again, we pulled this from fourthandshort.com. There may be other sites that don't rank everything the same way that we did, but
sure.
according to this particular site, that's how they had this ranked out. Again, for all of those title winners since 2016 title game, all in the top 3 or better. And
Oh,
for those that might be wondering, yes, the SIG was #1 in Indiana last year. So
bing, bing,
no
bing.
surprise there. So ultimately, what I think is interesting is, again, when you see the talent gap narrow, coaching just becomes more and more and more impactful. I'll throw out an example of the inverse of this. Georgia's secondary last season, not this
Oh,
past season, but a season before.
yep.
Georgia's secondary was one of their poorest secondaries that I had seen them have in a long, long time. And it wasn't because of lack of talent. For the record, they still had a very talented secondary. Certainly their starters were extremely talented. They were expected to do very well, and they drastically underperformed their number. What changed in 2024 for the 2024 season in their coaching room? And the answer is good old Muschamp, their cornerbacks coach for many a season, took a consulting role instead of the role of their cornerbacks coach so that he could be off on the weekends and not be present for game day and really not coach as much in general because his son was playing quarterback at Vanderbilt. So he went to go watch his games. I could see the impact.
Oh, yeah.
Pure and simple. So it's just very interesting. You talk about coaching impacts. They can be positive. They can be negative, obviously. Look at the Gators
Both
last
ways.
year with Napier. there's a
Whoa.
negative coaching impact.
Okay, that's
Pretty
shot
easy
number
to
2.
see. Yeah, well, we can fire negative coaching shots all day, right? But
Yes.
the point is that coaching, it becomes more and more and more important now, again, as your talent gap narrows. So how does this, I'll tie it back into the Gators now, how does this tie back into Sumrall and the Gators' current staff? So I'll let you answer that one first, and then I've got some stuff.
Well, the main thing I have on this is now we go from talent acquisition to roster management. And what, as we've said before, the Gators are not in a bad place. Yeah, we had 31, 32, whatever the number depart, right? But overall, when you look at the bones, the overall skeleton of this crew, he is still left in a good place. And not to mention what he followed it up with in the National Signing Day results. So that was what it was. So roster management is going to be key, and the rise of this new type of culture as a competitive advantage, right? Trying to combat the turnover. We said Sumrall did a great job in keeping the Fab Five, I call it the Fab Five, of course, that he needed to keep in order to kick off his momentum as the new coach. So combating turnover was huge. And of course, leadership development. The pieces that you do have that are staying long term, how are you going to develop them? Because now in this era, as we just mentioned about NIL and transfer portal, we've got a bunch of free agents, right? We've got a bunch of high market players that are going to go. They're not going to stay on the bench. They're not going to wait for their turn. They're going to go to another school, get a deal. They're going to play and start immediately. So immediate impact is going to change now compared to long-term development. And now, with all those other things combined, as far as what they're trying to do in the front office, right, by Mr. Caldwell and everything like that, this is going to be so crucial for this staff to make sure they get these decisions right. And the other thing that they're starting off in the right way, I tell you what, the amount of coaches that have been cut down, right? No two line coaches on the offensive side of the football, no two coaches on the defensive side of the football. Obviously, we did retain Gerald Chapman, so that was a good thing. But outside of that, Sumrall has a really unique opportunity to maximize NIL. We know he's already maximized the portal coming in because, folks, B and I already mentioned it before, did a phenomenal job coaching Tulane, getting them to the CFP. Sure, they didn't have a good showing. That's fine. But to manage Tulane and to manage Florida at the same time and finish where he finished with early National Signing Day and National Signing Day and getting the class that he got, phenomenal. So now let's see if the way that he coaches, the way that he is player driven, the way that he is process driven. I know we belabored that word with Coach Napier. It was what it was. But again, Sumrall has a different makeup to him, which is why he was so. It doesn't matter. He only coached for 4 years at Troy and Tulane. He was able to have that immediate impact. And those are the things that are going to make him, as we hope, as successful here where he wants to win immediately.
I like it. But I'm going to disagree with you.
Disagree all you want, my man. Go ahead.
Kind of. I do and I don't. I think what you're saying can be true. I just don't think it has to be true. And I think your proof of that is in all the guys that have, I say all the guys, some of the guys that have been as successful as they have using the portal effectively. Sumrall being one of them, for the record. He did that last year at Tulane. He got absolutely pillaged in the portal. We use P words here. In after the 2024 season, comes back in 2025, reloads using the portal, and has another successful season despite getting the talent that he did have on that team, including Darian Mensah, who's now going to be your starting quarterback at Miami next year for like $10 million. I don't know that that's really the deal, but it's going to be ludicrous.
Yeah, because Duke's
stripped away
from
him. Right. He was the starting quarterback at Tulane in 2024, if you didn't know. He got pilfered by Duke out of the portal, and then ironically by an ex-Miami head coach, and then ended up going to Miami for the new Miami head coach. Fun trivia. So anyway, but the point of the story here is that there's more than one way to do this. You don't have to do it the way you're talking about. Now, I do like your point as it relates to coaching and building and developing talent. If you can hold on to your roster and you can build that talent up, right, then I think you kind of fit that Sig mold a little bit more, to your point, right, because Sig had a lot of guys that stuck with him not only for a couple years at IU, but were with him before that at JMU, right? He carried a lot of players from James Madison, where Napier is now, again, ironically, lots of ties here. You know, he carried a lot of guys over to that Indiana squad and then got a couple of transfers, right? One being Mendoza, right? And pulled those guys in and was able to kind of put the pieces together that he needed to make it work, right? So I think that's a way to go for sure, but you can't discredit, I know it's a bad word right now, Kiffin, and what he's done in the portal and how successful he's been in doing that. So there's multiple models that you can make this work with. And so that's all I would say, is that I think what you're saying is absolutely possible, but it doesn't have to be that either. There's more than one way that you can do this now because of the portal, because of NIL. You have options, you have choices. Now, is it harder to make that work with chemistry and culture? Yeah, I think so. It's not my preferred model. I like the one that we're currently employing better. Personally, I think it's got a better hope for long-term success. But I also think it's potentially harder to maintain if you're not very strategic, right? You have to be really strategic. And like you said, you have to get a lot of decisions right.
Yeah.
You can do it, but it's tricky. It's tricky for sure. So I got some stats I'll lay on you about our current coaching staff, and how some of the success rate stuff relates to them. So first off, Sumrall, overall success rate since he was a head coach has actually shown a very steady increase. He started out at Troy at 74th overall in ranking for success rate, moved up to 44th his second year at Troy, and then his first year at Tulane. Now, he walked into a decent talent situation at Tulane for what he was dealing with. Overall ranking wasn't great, but his, for conference and stuff like that, he ended up as the 11th rated overall success rate in all of FBS. Now, granted, a lot of that's against, Atlantic Conference, AAC Conference stuff, right? Yeah. You got to take the competition into account there, right? Napier had some good seasons too. 16th was his highest. However, 11th is what he ranked out that year. What's interesting, though, is last year he fell all the way back with all that talent depletion I talked about, even though he did do a good job of reloading where he could. He fell all the way back to 64th in overall success rate. 64th. And yet they still won the conference and made the playoff. That's interesting. That's very interesting. So just some interesting food for thought for you. That's why we say success rate's not everything, right? Because Tulane was still a pretty good team last year. Obviously, they were not garbage. So just food for thought on that one. Additionally, I will throw in that Buster Faulkner is coming off his best season success rate wise as an OC, ranking 9th as an OC. Now that's as an OC. Buster. That's as an OC. Georgia. That's where I should say it's where Georgia Tech ranked overall. But still 9th in success rate, offensively only, not in total, just offensively only, obviously, because he wouldn't be responsible for anything else. But very interesting to see what both of those guys do with the talent upgrades they receive at US. Now, they also receive competition upgrades, right? One's going from the ACC to the SEC, of course. Now, that's a Power 4 to Power 4, kind of. Yeah. I don't know if the ACC is really Power 4. It's kind of flirts with it, right? But obviously, in Sumrall's case, as we have, of course, documented, and everybody has, your group of 5, or now group of 6, I guess, because it is G6 now. Yeah. Yeah. So 2 Power 4. And that kind of not just any Power 4 SEC. So we'll see how that goes. So the last thing I want to close with here, because as we mentioned, success rate is not everything. How else can we measure success for the coaching staff next year besides this stat or just wins and losses? So my thoughts on that are, one, things we always do, personnel decisions and evaluation, right? We always talk about this. Are they making the right calls at personnel? If we see other guys that play better on the field, why are they not getting more playing time, right? Why are starters starting if they don't play as well as backups, right? Things of that nature. So that's definitely something we're going to be looking at and evaluating. Fundamentals and consistency of execution on the field, right? Stuff that we've constantly seen be an issue in certain areas, or consistently, maybe not just in certain areas, maybe all the time, right? So consistency of execution and consistency of fundamental play. And then I'm going to bring up the one that we always talk about that I think a lot of other people don't, is what does this team culture look like? Because it's going to be different than it was, clearly, with some of the stuff there. But I love his player first mentality in speaking about John. Yeah. Love the stuff that he's talked about with players being first and players being, the only reason he has a job and stuff like that. So what does that do for the psyche of the team and for the culture? What does that do for demeanor in tough games, in hard games, in games we're not going to win, assuming those happen, which they probably will, but, we'll see. So, what does that look like? So I think for me, those 3 areas are going to be the key things to watch outside of your measurable stats being success rate, wins and losses, of course. Those are going to be 3 things I'm paying attention to. Anything you're looking for not in that group that we would want to measure success by for next season?
So not necessarily. Obviously, we're going to look at personnel decisions. We'll look at evaluations. Obviously, we had a sidebar conversation regarding scheme, especially on the defensive side of the football. There's that. Yeah, fundamentals and execution, sure. Obviously something we look at. Hey, guess what? No special teams, Matt, this year. No special teams.
Yeah, no special teams, Matt. Indeed.
That's unnecessary. The special teams, Indeed. Matt, has taken its talents to Baton Rouge. And then, team culture. I think the interesting. Oh, you like that?
That
I
was
think
really good. That one got
yeah.
me.
I think the interesting thing about team culture is, let's face it, Billy Napier established a very cohesive, unified front with this team. We saw this team in Napier's tenure that could have crumbled, fell apart, did this, did that. They circled around a freshman quarterback that was supposed to be the quarterback of the future, and all these things. It worked until it didn't. But you could not argue that there was not a better locker room and not a better group of kids that stayed with each other and did their best that they could. Having that been said, I know the difference was, I know people have made comments about Sumrall, oh, stripping the Gator logo and this and that. Let's face it, folks. Sumrall's attitude, yes, Billy was humble, Billy was quieter, but Sumrall's attitude speaks to everything about blue collar, tough, gritty, just doing the work. And that's the other thing too. When you look at his story, and for those of you who don't know, he was a DB at Kentucky, had to medically retire, and they forced him to medically retire because of spinal stenosis. I just love that mentality that he brings, the perspective that he brings, and the energy that he brings. Yes, we know guys are rah-rah guys. I don't think he's just a rah-rah guy. I think that's how he lives his life. That's how he's seen, that's how he's heard, and that's how he wants to be interpreted. And those aren't bad things. Now let's see if it really translates with this team. And I'll tell you, one of the things that he first did away with was a particular warm-up that I read about, that the team actually didn't care for when Napier was at the helm. He's like, why are we doing that? Let's get that out of here. That makes no sense. It just fatigues the guys. They don't like doing it. It really doesn't do anything, right? And so leading with that, it's going to be interesting to see how he builds culture, but a different kind of culture, not straying away from Napier, but again, it's just going to be built different than what Napier had built and put in place.
Well, I'd say that if you're listening to the players and taking their feedback, as long as it's within reason, obviously, you can't have
Yeah,
and I don't think there's any question that, the cooks are running the kitchen with him there, right? That's not, well, that's, I guess the cooks do run the kitchen. That's the wrong way to say that. But what is it? Oh goodness, I'm losing the analogy. My brain is too much mush right now.
uh-oh.
The too many Indians over the Chiefs, right? That's what I'm going for, right?
Okay,
Uh,
okay.
that's still not right, but you get the point, right? The guys that are making the decisions are should not be the players, is what I'm trying to say. I'm just not pulling the analogy to do it. Again,
Yeah,
too much brain fatigue. But but ultimately, I don't think there's any risk of that with him. He's way too decisive a guy. He's way too competitive a guy. He's way too much of a take
yes,
charge guy, as you said, right? Yes, he may be a rah rah guy, but he's not a rah rah guy in the sense of that he's just going to let the players walk on him. There's no way, from the impressions that I get. He may
exactly.
put them first, but that doesn't mean he's going to let them, take control, right? So yeah, that's really interesting. I like that though, because I think to your point, taking suggestions and evaluating them and saying, hey, this does or doesn't make sense. Cool. Um, yeah, I think that's good. Good deal. All right. Well,
Well,
I
and
like it.
and and that's
Go
the other
ahead.
thing too. Like when you look at the difference of what we talked about before, especially when it comes to culture. Again, no one's saying that Napier's culture was this or that. If anything, that's what made this team stick together for as long as it did. But Summerall's mentality and his approach to things is just so different that, Billy was more wait and see. Okay,
Yeah,
Billy,
no
you
kidding.
know, Billy's playing chess, right? But here comes Summerall. There is no wait. We just need to see. We just need to go and do, right? And when you look at a situation of, there's some people who need to have a meeting before the meeting and need to have another meeting to talk about what we're doing in the other meeting to do it. And that's Billy. It's methodical, it's processor, it's laid out. And Summerall's just like, let's have a freaking meeting and let's just do it. Okay? Done.
Yeah.
And that's it. And then there's your difference in implementation. And that's why I believe the effects will be more immediate and they'll be louder.
Yeah. Well, again, good things for us to evaluate.
Yes.
You know, again, one of the things that we're going to do our best to do this year, especially, is we're not going to show a lot of forgiveness, or at least I'm not. And
No.
that's not to be harsh on John, but just going to evaluate what we see, and we're going to say what we see. Again, at least that's where I'm at with it, and I'm not interested in giving too much grace. Not that you don't get any grace your first year, you do get a little, but certainly. But I think, you know, again, we set the bar in the last pod, you know, talking about some of those expectations, and
yes,
I want to hold him to those. You know, again, I'm not saying he has to hit every single one, but I think setting some of those expectations as being, you know, realistic things that are possible, you know, and let's see how many of them we can hit, right? Again, don't have to be 100%, but let's make sure that we're executing and that we're seeing some of those things. And again, looking at some of these others that we're talking about tonight from a coaching standpoint, because I think, again, the importance of this cannot be overstated right now. The importance of coaching, again, to kind of tie this back into the theme here, is massive. So when we look at the coaching hires, the coordinator hires, right, and the head coach hire in general here, let's see how we evaluate this, and did we get those things right? I think there's promise, but we'll have to wait and see. Too soon to tell. Press conferences and you know, padless practice ain't going to tell us that. So we'll we'll learn more as we go, right? So absolutely. With that, I think we can put a bow on this one. Talk to us about where we're going from here.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good wrap up. Next regularly scheduled podcast going to go to you on March the 3rd, where we'll be discussing, speaking of, Sumrall's mentality and impact on the identity of Florida football. So those of you who listen regularly, first of all, thank you. Secondly, you might remember we did a pod a year ago on the identity of Florida football. So we're going to be diving a little bit more into Sumrall's mentality, that, again, that blue collar work first mindset. And we're going to take a look and see if we can figure out what impact it is going to have on Florida football's new identity as we move into the Sumrall era. So looking forward to that one for sure, B.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. You gave a little bit of a free preview of some of your thoughts there at the end, didn't you?
I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea. No idea.
Good stuff. All right. Well, enjoyed it as always. We appreciate it. I want to definitely say thank you to everybody out there for listening. Appreciate that as always. And really do enjoy doing this out of our shared love for Gator football, as we always say at the end here. But yeah, I'll turn it over to you to take us home, man.
Shared love, aka therapy, aka verbal confirmation, aka stress relief. So anyways, to that end, wherever you are and whenever you may be listening, thank you for taking the time, and we will see you around, Gator Nation.